First of all, I'd like to thank you for being a part of this First Friday. First Friday is sponsored by the Town of Woodside's Art and Culture Committee, a group of like-minded individuals who work towards creating interesting programs here in our Independence Hall for the town. We have programs on art, history, musical presentation, and like this evening, even natural history. So we are fortunate to have somebody who's come a long ways to present for us this evening on a very popular animal that many of us have seen in our area, since we're fortunate enough to live in an environment that supports creatures like the bobcat and mountain lions and coyotes, and deer, quite a variety. So this evening, Sarah Killingsworth is going to be presenting wonderful presentations about bobcats in our backyard. Sarah's a wonderful photographer and educator. She lives in the North Bay, and she's very involved in the community there, outreach and education programs. She's part of League of Conservation Photographers who work hard to create images to support conservation, which is a very important subject. So this evening with bobcats. Bobcats are amazing creatures. And so I just want to have a quote about them. The bobcat walks quietly through the wilderness, a master of shadows and a keeper of the night. And after this evening's presentation, I think you'll find out more about how they are keepers of the wilderness and the night. So without further ado, here is Sarah. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Tom, for that lovely introduction, and thank all of you for being here tonight. I am super excited to be here. 6 years ago, I met someone who would change my life. She was strong and beautiful, and like me, she was a devoted mother raising her babies in the suburbs. And when I saw her in August of 2019, I didn't know that I was on the brink of a new chapter in my life. But while hiking a new trail along a North Bay neighborhood, I saw a mother bobcat with 3 kittens. The first bobcat kittens that I had ever seen. I was ecstatic, and I was transfixed, because she was at the edge of a neighborhood on a hillside, not in a remote location or a large park, open space, not Mount Tam or Point Reyes. The neighbors told me she lived in their yards. There were cars, there were people walking dogs, and yet here she was, raising and hiding her babies in the bushes of someone's side yard, hiding them in small trees and going to hunt gophers. I spent hundreds of hours looking for her and observing her. And I want to share her story with you. She doesn't have a name, but in my mind and in my heart, she is known as the Bobcat Mama. I've always been a cat person, and when it comes to wildlife, bobcats are my favorite species. So it's no surprise that a suburban bobcat mama captured my heart and inspired my coexistence work. After I first saw her, I read all the literature that I could find about urban and suburban bobcats, and I started visiting her neighborhood several times a week, trying to catch a glimpse of her and her kittens. Bobcats are elusive and skittish, but they're common in the Bay Area, not just in parks, but in neighborhoods as well. How many of you have seen a bobcat in the wild? How many of you have seen one in your neighborhood? Nice. Okay, in your yard. How many people have had bobcats in your yard? Yeah, awesome. As I spent time observing her, I learned where in the neighborhood she had her territory, where there were other bobcats with neighboring territories. And I had the privilege of watching her day-to-day life raising 3 kittens in the suburb. Not just 1 year, but over several different years with different litters of kittens. So this field that she's hunting right here is just literally the middle of a cul-de-sac, surrounded by houses and joggers and people walking dogs. And she was just hunting. She would bring her kittens to people's front doors, hunting in the yard. Now, before I tell you more about her, and I have a lot more to say about her, I do want to just go over some fast facts about bobcats. And you may already know some of these things, but people often think that bobcats are much larger than they are. From a weight standpoint, here in California, they're on the lighter side. In colder climates, they tend to be a little heavier. But females are just 14 pounds on average. So that's really a very overweight house cat. I mean, it's not really that big. Their lifespan is actually 7 to 10 years in the wild. There was one in captivity that lived 30 years. Their camouflage coat is part of what makes them so distinctive. It's also how I'm able to identify individual bobcats. I spend a lot of time with wild bobcats in suburban and in wild places. And the markings on their forelegs, as well as the face shape, the ear tufts, and then other facial features, eye color, nose color, all help me identify an individual cat. And in terms of size, they're really like 3 feet long. And their tail, usually the bobtail, people sometimes think it's going to be super short. It's more like 6 inches long. Sometimes they're mistaken for mountain lions because the tail is longer than people expect it to be. But even with that petite size, they can jump vertically 12 feet. Think about that. It's just incredible. I mentioned they have tufts on the back tops of their ears. They do have predators. They are a predator themselves, but they can be preyed upon by mountain lions, wolves, coyotes, golden eagles, possibly black bear or fox, and the kittens are also at risk from great horned owls, which can take almost anything they feel like eating. So, kittens. Bobcat kittens, when they're born, are tiny and helpless. Their eyes don't open for the first 10 days or so. And when they first venture outside the den, they don't go very far. Their legs are wobbly. And Mama Bobcat, when she came back, would lie in the shade of a bush to nurse them. And you'll see that she's conked out, exhausted, because she would spend her days and her nights managing 3 very energetic kittens, bringing them food and nursing them, and hunting to feed herself. When she headed out to hunt, she would leave them stashed under coyote brush or pride of Madeira, often in someone's front yard or side yard. And she'd be gone for hours hunting. When she brought back prey for the kittens, whether it was gophers or voles, quail, brush rabbit, even jackrabbits, she would typically make repeated trips bringing food back to the kittens before she ever paused to consume something for herself. I marveled at her dedication. You can see in these images, these kittens are very young, and so they still have the bluish eyes. As they get older, their coat changes to a little bit rustier, and their eye color changes more to that caramel beige. When mom's away, the kittens will play. And with 3 kittens, they each have their own individual personalities, playful, shy, timid. There's a lot of wrestling that happens when she's not around, and there's also a lot of napping. But I watched her and all the effort that she put into feeding them. And when she came back, she would walk the edge of the bushes where she'd left them, trying to find them, calling to them. And if they didn't come quickly, you could feel her anxiety as she paced more frantically, trying to call for them until they would come out. If she had prey, if she had food for them, they often would come racing out of the bushes because they'd be trying to beat each other to the food. And they would each find a spot either to nap. Usually when they're little, they stay pretty close together. As they get older, they'd be more independent, but when they're little, the kittens would stay together. And that bottom one, obviously there's another one standing on its neck. Those are wrestling bobcat kittens, just like siblings. But she worked really hard feeding these kittens, often collapsing exhausted next to them when she returned. But before lying down, when she greeted them, she would always nuzzle and groom them. And she would nap as they nursed. The rambunctious kittens sometimes would climb over her. And just like your house cat will flick its tail in an annoyance, Bobcats flick their tail when they're concentrating or when they're annoyed, and she would, if they were annoying her, she would flick her tail, which sometimes to one of the spunkier kittens would look like a new plaything, and then the kitten would be playing with her tail, which would make her more annoyed and usually would get a swat. But as the mother of 2 young boys myself at the time, I could relate to her devotion and to her fatigue. So being in a neighborhood with green spaces in the center of some of the streets, she was regularly crossing the road to get to and from food, water, and the kittens. I marveled at how she managed the traffic, and I spent a lot of time worrying about her getting hit by a car, about someone coming too fast around a blind corner. I watched her teach the kittens how to navigate the territory with different vocalizations that would tell them to stop or go. She taught them to wait at a curb to let cars pass, and then would call them to have them safely cross the street. Tragically, one year she lost a kitten to a road strike. Kitten survival is only 50 to 60% in the first year. Bobcats are nothing if not athletic, and their hunting ability is impressive. Every bobcat I've ever watched has patience to sit on a gopher hole for 45 minutes or more, has strength to leap vertically 6 or more feet, and ability to get its prey in its mouth in a fraction of a second. As the kittens got older, she brought them into the field to hunt with them. So this is a gopher. Here in Northern California, we have Bada's pocket gophers. They live underground, so a lot of people have never seen one, so I include a photo of one in case you're curious what their primary food source is. But she would hunt in an area that was a park. That's somebody's side yard, right? Any place where there's irrigation and moisture, there's going to be rodents. And she would make a kill and then bring it back to where she had stashed the kittens. She could take a jackrabbit, little voles, and teaching the kittens to hunt. So in the bottom corner of this image, there's a dirt pile that's a gopher hole. So she's trying to teach the kitten to be patient and wait. And if you've ever watched a bobcat hunting, you know that they will sit, sometimes with their eyes closed, which I think helps with both listening and camouflage, but they'll sit over a hole and just wait until they hear the gopher coming to the surface, and then they'll lunge or pounce. They have a couple different maneuvers with their paws and their bodies, but basically as it comes to the surface, they try and grab it. The kittens don't generally have the same level of patience, and so typically when she started bringing the kittens out to hunt, the kittens would get eager to jump, and would jump too soon and scare the gopher back into the hole. And she would have to find another gopher to hunt because that one was not coming back up after that kitten put its face in the hole. The kittens do start hunting on their own. So the kitten on the left is probably about 3.5 months old. I actually think that gopher was dead when it pulled it out of the hole. In part because it's carrying it by its nose, which is not usually how they would carry or kill a gopher. I hope that it was a gopher that was stabbed by a great blue heron. So if you don't know this, great blue herons eat a variety of things, including gophers, and they stab them with their beaks. And so I wondered if this one had been injured by a great blue heron, and then the kitten got it, and it died in its hole, and then the kitten got it. Alternatively, it's possible it had been poisoned, which is a much more problematic scenario for that bobcat kitten. Secondary rodenticide poisoning is a huge problem for wildlife in California in general. Bobcats are unique in their ability to tolerate poisons. It doesn't typically kill them outright, but a study in Southern California found that with suburban and urban bobcats, which have an increased exposure to rodenticides, that the bobcats were actually dying of mange, which is a skin mite that causes them to scratch and lose fur. And the rodenticide poisoning causes their inflammation response to change and also their immune system to be suppressed. And so they basically become susceptible to dying from other things as a result of consuming the rodenticides. Now, we have limited rodenticide use in California significantly, but it is still common in places for either public safety or food preparation or food areas. You still see the black boxes around, and that's terrible for anything that's eating the prey that is then being poisoned. The bobcat kitten on the right is almost a year old, so it's much bigger and hunting on its own. So this is not her. This is a different bobcat. I wanted to just share her story with you in part because I saw how hard she was working to keep herself and her kittens alive. And the fact that she was doing it surrounded by people and cars and dogs, because the green spaces in our neighborhoods provide habitat with prey. And habitat connectivity is key. As our neighborhoods and our towns and cities keep expanding into the wild, wildlife is losing habitat. And add drought and wildfires and other things, and these green belts and this connectivity is a lifeline for wildlife to get food and water and to be able to safely navigate territories for mates. Sometimes people worry about bobcats eating domestic pets. They really don't. I'm not going to say it's impossible. It is technically possible, but the studies of bobcats, urban and suburban bobcats, and their diet showed 0% of domestic cat or dog in their scat. They will protect themselves, and they will protect their territories, and they will protect their kittens. So it is possible, if you have a bobcat in the yard, that it will tangle with your pet as a protective measure, not to eat it, but to protect the kittens. The mama bobcat that I've been talking to you about, she did end up in a conflict with a domestic cat that was an outdoor cat. The cat was fine and she was fine, but the cat had come too close to her kittens, and she protected the kittens. So there are a lot of things we can do to help bobcats, and honestly, they help lots of other wild neighbors as well. Wildlife crossing areas, obviously the one for P22 down in Los Angeles is a very well-known and well-funded one. But there are a lot of groups, even here in the Bay Area, working to build overpasses. It can be culverts. It doesn't have to go over the road, but building ways that wildlife can cross roads safely. When they're isolated, you get what's called genetic bottlenecking, where they're not able to find mates with different genetic material than their immediate family, and so you get genetic inbreeding that's bad overall for the health of the species. So connectivity is important, not just for food and water, but also for mates and for the health of the species. Cats inside and dogs on a leash is helpful, not just for bobcats, but also coyotes, and keeping your pet food and water inside tends to attract wildlife. Looks a little bit like a buffet. Rodenticides, I already talked about, not using them. Things like raptors, barn owls, and other predators are much better rodent control. Another issue that happens sometimes with bobcats, because they are so beautiful and relatively petite, especially with kittens, people sometimes think they need help, and especially if a mom leaves a kitten alone, which they will. I've watched one, she left one alone for 8 hours. And if you saw that kitten, you might think it had been abandoned. And it's really important, if you see an animal that you think needs help, to reach out to a local wildlife rehab center and let somebody who can really assess the animal decide whether there's a need to intervene or not. Unfortunately, wildlife that is fed by humans loses its fear of humans and is often either killed by a road strike because they're near cars trying to get more food, or it's happened here in the Bay Area, not just with bobcats, but also coyotes. When people are feeding them, then they start approaching humans for food and develop more aggressive behaviors. They've lost their fear. And there was a bobcat in Marin County it was a kitten at a trailhead, and the neighbors thought it was starving, so they started feeding it cat food. And unfortunately, the bobcat never learned to hunt and became aggressive and started clawing at, and in one case, nipped at the hiking boot of hikers. And in California, the rule is if wildlife breaks the skin of a human, it has to be tested for rabies. And the only way to do that is to euthanize the animal and take brain tissue. So any animal that engages in any level of conflict with humans is likely going to be euthanized. And so feeding even kittens, but feeding bobcats, feeding coyotes, feeding foxes, all has dire consequences for the animals. And even if they are brought into a wildlife rehab center, they then will live the rest of their lives as an ambassador animal. They'll never be in the wild again. And that happens, unfortunately. People sometimes do take bobcats as pets. There are a couple of bobcats up at Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue that were found, but they were found so habituated to humans that they weren't releasable. So they're now ambassador animals. This cat, just to close the loop on this story, this is in Wild Care, which is a wildlife rehabilitation center in Marin County. And this is a male bobcat, was found on someone's back patio, starving, covered in parasites, and they suspected rodenticide poisoning. So it was brought into Wild Care. They didn't think it would survive, but they treated it, and amazingly it did survive, and I was actually able to go to the release of the cat back into the neighborhood where it had been found. So wildlife rehab centers do amazing work. And now I will give you my closing thought and then open it up to questions, because as much as I love talking about wildlife, I really love conversations about wildlife even more. So I want to hear what you guys want to know and stories you might want to tell. But my closing thought and the thing that motivates my work is the fact that at the end of the day, wildlife needs the same things that we do to survive. And for wildlife, every day is about survival. But they need just the same things we do. They need food, water, shelter, and a safe place to raise their babies. And while the bobcats are elusive and skittish, they are adaptable and can live in our green spaces, even in urban areas. And I, for one, am incredibly grateful to have them as wild neighbors. And with that, I will take questions. Yes.
So those photographs are amazing. How far away from them were you? Using telephoto or did you get up close?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, so all of the photos in this presentation are photos that I took, and I do use a long lens, so typically 400 or 600 millimeters. Yeah. Yeah, thank you very much. Over here, yeah.
Comment also on your method photography with patience that is evident when you're taking these photographs.
No, thank you very much. I appreciate that. And yes, patience. My husband jokes that wildlife is the only area of life I really have patience in, but I do have a lot for when it comes to bobcats. And following her for several years, there would be days I would be spending 8 hours trying to track her, looking at scat, looking for tracks, trying to figure out where she was. And I'd be lucky to see her or the kittens for 15 minutes, spending a whole day tracking her. Yeah. Yeah. Yes.
2 questions.
Yeah.
You alluded to wildlife rehab centers.
Yes.
How would I find one of those if I had an issue?
So I think the closest one down here, so there's the Peninsula Humane Society, and they actually also have a second facility down in San Jose or close to San Jose. So that would be a good starting point. So there's Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue, Napa County Wildlife Rescue, the Lindsay Museum in the East Bay, and Wild Care is in Marin County. I'm not sure of anything other than the Peninsula Humane Society, but I know because I've worked with them around some coyotes that were being rehabbed, and that's a very highly specialized, difficult thing to rehab. So.
And the other question was, you alluded to ambassadors.
Yes.
How would I schedule a meeting with one of them?
So actually, it depends on the facility. So Sonoma County Wildlife Rescue, though, does allow people to come up and visit, but you have to schedule it with them. And I can't remember now if they have like open days. They also have events up on the property, and so you can go up for that. I have a friend who's a rehabber there, so I was able to go up and photograph the bobcats in their care that way. But I'm sure you could coordinate getting up there for a tour. Yeah. Let's see, there's a couple in the back here. I'll let you guys duke it out.
What's the bobcat population like? Is it flourishing? Is it diminishing?
It's a great question. So, in general, like big picture, stepping way back, when the European settlers arrived in North America, there was a war on predators. And as they moved from the East Coast to the West Coast, they did their very best to eradicate grizzlies, pumas, wolves. Bobcats had bounties on them, coyotes, you name a predator species, and they attempted to eradicate them. They were pretty successful, unfortunately, with grizzlies, pumas, and wolves. Bobcats have had sort of a mixed trajectory. They are an endangered species in, I believe, still 4 states, and that's sort of in the East and Midwest. So I think Delaware no longer has an extant population. They consider any that they see there to just be moving through. So Delaware's lost all their bobcats. So in general, as a range, bobcats are California to Maine, Canada to Mexico. They're the most widespread cat in North America. So they should be in every state. My recollection is that it's New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Illinois, and one other state where they're still endangered, and they have very few. Here in California, we have a healthy population of them, and I don't think the trend is particularly up or down. We have had some mange issues in the Bay Area, even with bobcats, particularly in the South Bay and the East Bay. But the population seems to be pretty stable. Yes?
I saw a video of a bobcat, I guess within 12 feet, and said knocking a bird out of the air.
Yes.
This, unusual?
I've seen it. They are amazing. When it comes to prey, anytime an animal is thinking about, a predator is thinking about whether it's going to eat something or not, it's a cost-benefit analysis. It's the risk of injury, the amount of energy expended versus the calories it might get when it consumes that animal. So for an animal like a bobcat, the easiest prey is going to be a rodent, right? Something that's not going to hurt it, probably takes relatively little energy, one short leap if they're good, right? I mean, in my experience, they're successful maybe a third of the time. 2 out of 5 times, something like that. So they have a lot of misses with the leaps. But rabbits and rodents are going to be easiest. Birds are probably next, and particularly in the Bay Area, they hunt quail. And so I have seen them leap into the air and clap their front paws to get quail. But they'll take turkeys, and in other places where it's colder, they actually do take deer. They'll take small deer. There is documentation of them taking elk in Yellowstone, pronghorn. It's uncommon when you think about the amount of energy it would take to bring an animal like that down. For a cat that, I mean, the males, admittedly in the colder climates, they were weighing a little bit more, but still you're talking about like a 35-pound cat. This is not a huge animal. They're able to take down larger prey. And then they do eat... there's some videos online, some fascinating things. You can see them with snakes, lizards. Very rarely, I recently saw a video of one getting a fish. That's pretty uncommon. But, opportunistic. They're obligate carnivores, so they need meat. Unlike a coyote that'll eat just literally about anything, bobcats want meat. Yes?
So would they eat cats? Like, would they recognize their domestic species?
They generally won't eat cats, not because they're not close enough related that they would consider them like kin, I don't think. They see them as a threat, for sure, just like a domestic dog. But a domestic cat represents a potential risk of injury between the claws and the teeth. And so I have never seen a bobcat hunting a domestic cat or a feral cat or a cat in the field in any way. I think it would generally steer clear. But if you had a starving bobcat and a cat that was, looking like easy prey, could it? Sure. But it's not their preferred food source. They're not closely related enough to crossbreed. No. So Canada lynx. So bobcats came across a couple million years ago, the Bering Strait. So there's 4 species of lynx in the world. There's Iberian lynx, Eurasian lynx, Canada lynx, and this beauty, which is Lynx rufus. Lynx rufus came to North America probably from the Eurasian lynx a couple million years ago. Canada lynx came again from the Eurasian lynx, but more recently. And Canada lynx have feet that are specially adapted to the snow. They have really broad paws. They have thicker coats. They're adapted to the climates in Canada, really, where we find them. But there is overlapping range between bobcats and the lynx. And the lynx are a very specialized diet, whereas the bobcats are obligate carnivores, but they'll eat a lot of different meats. The lynx are really looking for snowshoe hare. They have a very specific food, and any species that has a very specific dietary focus is at risk because those populations can be damaged. And a lot of the deforestation in Canada has impacted the lynx. But the lynx and the bobcat can interbreed, and do, in the overlap of their range. It's not common, but it does happen. Let's see, I don't know who was next here. Here.
Do you know the typical range of a bobcat male?
Mm-hmm. So the range depends on the availability of food. They need a territory big enough to sustain them. And males and females have individual territories. Male and female territory will sometimes overlap slightly. Females generally will not allow overlap. That's what the literature says. I've personally seen them allow overlap, so I think there's some question about that. But the size of the territory is dependent on food. And so, for example, in the North Bay, the bobcats that I've observed, their territory might be half a square mile, a square mile. It doesn't have to be very big. And yet, on the East Coast, where there's snow, where there's less food, it can be 40 miles, 40 square miles. So there's a huge amount of variation based on the terrain and the availability of food in their territory size. But they'll defend a territory big enough, basically, to feed themselves. Yeah. Yes?
This is a question about appearance.
Okay.
I was wondering if that's a kind of a species variation or what?
It's just, it's variation. So just like their spots and their coloration, the ear tufts can vary by individual cats. It's not a subspecies. There's basically two subspecies of bobcats in North America, the West Coast and the East Coast, and they kind of divide them at the Great Plains. They used to used to be 12 subspecies, but they've decided there's really only 2. But it's an individual trait. And I don't know if you guys noticed, I'll see if I can go backwards. Like, look at the spots on that kitten. It's a crazy pattern on that coat compared to some of these other, even his mother, like, her coat isn't nearly that spotted, right? That's the mother of that one that has the, like, almost leopard-like spots. So, there's a lot of variation in their facial markings, in their coat, in their ear tufts, and that's just individual variation. So, got on that. Yes?
Do the males live completely independent? You don't mention any male.
His job is a relatively short-lived job. So this presentation, I'm focused on a mama and her kittens, and in the feline species in general, the males are not present. So amongst the cats in general, the mothers raise their kittens. Things like coyotes and foxes and raptors, the males are involved in parenting. So peregrines, great horned owls, gray foxes, the dads feed, and coyotes, the dads feed just as much as the moms. I mean, the moms obviously nurse, but when it comes to bringing back prey, the male and the female are both feeding their young. But in all the cat species, the mom's doing it all on her own.
Is there any risk to the kittens from the males?
Yeah, just like with bears, you get, especially a male that's not the father of the kittens, one of the things that can kill the kittens is an adult male bobcat. Yeah. Yes?
I would like to know if the fur becomes lighter in the wintertime, for instance, with snow.
I don't know the answer to that question. I have not observed a lot of bobcats in the snow myself. The pictures I've seen would suggest no, but I don't know that for certain. It's a great question. Yes?
There's a park around the Sawyer Camp Trail.
Uh-huh.
And in the middle of it, they've got picnic tables, plus they've got a ton of trash cans. Is that a danger for them, having an area where they know there's food and they congregate there?
Yeah, it's not normal for bobcats to eat at something that's not alive. So they actually typically won't scavenge. They want to kill their prey. So if there are animals that are, I mean, it's sort of, so part of the work that I do on coexistence is for Project Coyote. So I'm a program coordinator for them, for the youth education and outreach program, and I do a lot of talks about coexistence with coyotes. And we talk about intentional versus unintentional feeding. So intentional feeding of wildlife is what it sounds like. You bring out cat food or chicken bits or something and you put it out with the intention of feeding wildlife. Unintentional feeding of wildlife tends to be unsecured compost, garbage that they can access, fallen fruit around the base of a tree, things that animals will perceive as food that's not necessarily a human intentionally feeding an animal, but the animals are still being drawn into consuming human food. And human food is not good for wildlife. Some of it's frankly not really great for us, but it's definitely not good for wildlife. So yeah, I mean, I would say that any trash situation that wildlife is feeding on is not a good scenario, in part because it's teaching the animals to be close to humans for getting food. And that comes with risks of dogs, potential dog attack, cars. If there's a conflict with humans, as I mentioned, it'll get euthanized, so it can be tested for rabies. So there's a lot of reason to get wildlife-proof trash cans in parks where there's coyotes or bobcats or other animals around.
I just wonder whether they have rats that come to get the food and then it's an easy place for them to get the rat.
Yes, and that is true too. That can be what happens. I've observed, in fact, sometimes in these talks, I have a photo of a fox jumping on a rodent next to a trash can because the trash does attract rodents. So that could be what's drawing in the bobcats, which would be better for them than human food, but still not an ideal scenario.
It's a great place to see them though.
Duly noted. Thank you. Yes.
2 questions. Are you still watching the family? And what age do the kittens get to be when they kind of stray from the mom?
Okay. The hard answer first. No, I am not still watching the family. She is no longer with us. Yeah. That was a heartbreaker. But she was probably, so I can age bobcats. I mean, if I know when they're a kitten, if I see them young enough, I can age bobcats pretty reliably. But if I haven't seen them as a kitten, then I have to just judge based on the condition of their coat and their teeth and how many nicks and scars and kind of assess how old. I think when I started watching her, she was 3 or 4, and 7 is sort of upper limits. So unfortunately, she's not around anymore. But her kittens are. With respect to the age that the kittens are independent, so the kittens are typically born in the spring, typically in March. Gestation period for kittens is about 60 days, 62 days, somewhere in there. Litters of 2 to 4. She seemed to always have 3. That was what we always saw. And they typically will learn to hunt and sort of get ready to disperse by that first fall into winter, so that by the time she's pregnant again the next spring, the kittens have all been pushed out on their own. And if they try and come back to mom, because sometimes they do, they'll get whacked. It's a hard, sort of tough love scenario. Yeah. Other questions? Yes.
So I've seen gray foxes and bobcats in my yard.
Great.
But never near in time to one another. So like a couple of them will be around for a few weeks, and then once they're gone, so are they just moving on, or is one scaring off the other?
Yeah, if it's an adult bobcat, the foxes will probably steer clear of it. So a fox is going to be about 10 to 12 pounds, so definitely smaller than a male bobcat and slightly smaller than a female bobcat. Both cats and gray foxes can climb trees. So fun fact, gray foxes have articulated shoulders, so they're the only canid in the world other than the Asian raccoon dog that can truly climb trees, because they can actually go up like a cat can. In terms of not seeing them together, they probably are steering clear of each other. Some of it can be time of day. So I didn't talk about people think of bobcats as crepuscular or maybe even nocturnal, and so people sometimes ask about, like, why is it out during the day? It's hunting during the day. But the truth is, they'll hunt whenever they can find the food, and if it's a space where they're not being bothered by humans, especially, then hunting during the day when gophers and rabbits are out is, a totally normal thing. It's also true that when she was feeding 3 kittens, she had to kill a lot more gophers and rabbits to feed the whole family, and so the number of hours, just the sheer number of hours hunting increases in that sort of spring into summer zone, like the April through, let's say, September, October, because hopefully by November they're feeding themselves, but, she's still working to try and keep them alive. So, and foxes are nocturnal. So gray foxes will generally be nocturnal. The kits sometimes will come out and play in the sun in the mornings, in my experience, but they're less likely to be out during the day. Yeah. Other questions?
Where do they get the water that they have?
Great question. So bobcats, like most cats, get most of their moisture from their food, actually. But they do drink water. And I was amazed watching her because the options for water weren't huge in the area where she was. And she would literally find where somebody had broken irrigation that had made like a little dent in their yard that was like a puddle, and she would find it and drink it. Or like after a rainstorm, there'd be a place in the gutter near a storm drain where it had like temporarily pooled up. She'd go over there and lap from that. So there was a small creek, and if nothing else was available, she would go down and sort of lap at the creek. But they don't drink much water. Other questions? Yes?
You mentioned about black boxes.
Yes.
Could you explain a little bit?
Yes, I'd be happy to. They're bait boxes. So basically, for rodenticide poisoning, they are like, it almost looks like a little plastic hut. It's got a round hole at one end usually that the rodents can go in, and it's an attractant, but it's a poisonous attractant. And there's actually some really interesting studies that suggest that those bait boxes actually attract the rodents. I was just part of a conference call talking about this because those boxes are terrible for a lot of species, not just bobcats, but coyotes and other raptors, anything that eats the prey that's been poisoned. And they're exploring other strategies because what they're finding is some of the places where they're putting in those bait boxes, they're actually bringing in more rodents by having the attractant. And, of course, then they're poisoning them. Yes?
Is it one directional, or they go in, they come out?
No, they go in, they come out. And so that's how things eat them. So, and not to get too graphic, but so there are anticoagulant rodenticides, and animals don't die right away, but apparently it makes them very thirsty. And so the rodents will be like kind of not very with it, but trying to go find water. So they'll look like easy prey for the predators, unfortunately. Yeah, for sure. It's an important question.
There are no other questions. I want to remind you all that next month we have 2 events happening on the same day. We have Woodside Youth Photography. So we have students who have presented their work to the town. The town has made the prints, and so they'll be on display. And then that'll start at 5:30, and then from 7 to 8, we have a fine art photographer, Jennifer Fraser, who will be coming and giving a presentation. So I hope you'll come back for that. Now, we've seen some amazing photographs, thanks to Sarah. She's provided information that can help us understand these creatures. But it's important that all of you here realize that you all make a difference. The question is, what kind of difference will you make? We lost a very important individual recently. Jane Goodall passed away. I was fortunate to be able to meet and spend some time with her years ago. We need more people like Jane Goodall, people who look at the world very different from many others who only look at it for consuming. So please take to heart the fact that all of you make a difference, and decide, again, what kind of difference you want to make in the world. And thank you for coming this evening, and thank you, Sarah, for the